Well, Brian, I was looking at your achievements over a long period of time at CSL. One of the most interesting things for me is that Behring actually began fractionating plasma well before CSL did. ZLB was set up and was well before CSL started working in plasma, and yet CSL bought them. The question, I suppose, is why wasn't it the other way around? How come you were able to go from standing start to the position where you bought Behring and you bought ZLB and you, through that, became the largest manufacturer and seller of plasma products?
Well, there's no doubt we always, as a company, had great respect for what ZLB did in immunoglobulin and Aventis Behring, particularly Behring. They were the pioneers of the whole coagulation field in plasma derivatives. So we always greatly respected them. So it is interesting that sometimes even the pioneers can fall on complex times if their owners get distracted, don't invest in the business, and so we got our timing right when we approached both companies, and they were involved in a disposal process, that we were able to share with them our enthusiasm for their business.
Was it just management, or was it because CSL was better managed than Aventis Behring?
It was certainly that
ZLB?
we could convey the view that we wanted to give the business a future. We had a clear plan as to how we could add value to the business. We respected them greatly for their skills and their capabilities, so we weren't cultural imperialists, that we greatly respect our Swiss and German colleagues. And so there was no notion that they were being taken over and that they were going to work to our method. We actually more respected what they could do for us. And so to some degree we were able to lift them out of where they were and give them a global vision for the business and a vision for success in that. Because
it is incredible that you were able, this little Australian business that used to be government owned, was able to do that. What you say is to give these German and Swiss leaders in the field that started well before you, give them that global vision that you talk about. It's an incredible thing.
Well, I mean, it just shows you that it is true also that CSL was a respected peer in the field. The fact that although we came from a small market, we were government owned, didn't really diminish the reality that we had technical experts inside the company. We spoke the same language. They understood what we had done as an organisation as well. So it is true that we collected the relatives to some degree. We were all relatives. We were all fundamentally geographically constrained regional businesses. It's just that we were the runt of the litter to a degree. And yet, to some degree, whether it be the Swiss, actually their main business was actually in the US at the time, and Aventis Behring, which was mainly a very significant European business, we were able to give them a view. If we brought the family together, to some degree, we could create a great organisation that we'd all be proud to work for. And I think that's what we did.
Brian, as Alan said, you were a small company, and you were an Australian company with very little experience offshore before ZLB. At what point, after you joined CSL, did you think there's a chance to build an international, indeed global business here?
Well, you always have a dream, and certainly I'd worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I'd lived in Germany, so I understood there are only two ways in which you could succeed in our industry. You both had to innovate, you had to have something that people wanted to buy, and you had to operate in Europe and North America. You could not survive in a local/regional market. So the rules were very clear. The question is, were we going to be a victim of that process? Many companies end up putting up the flag and sell themselves off. Or were we going to be a willing participant to try and be a collector and aggregator of these assets? Well, I guess we were young enough and enthusiastic enough that we wanted to have a go. I mean, the whole idea of the privatisation was to give the company a future and have a go. The easy thing is to put yourself up for sale. So we didn't want to do that, and the management were of a mindset that that's what we wanted to do.
So you're saying on day one you had that vision?
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Day one we said we wanted to build a great Australian company that was going to be global in those things. Now, we didn't really know what the pathway was. I certainly accept that as well.
But the first thing you did was the contract with the American Red Cross in 1999.
Actually, the funny thing, the first thing I did, and how I managed to persuade government that they wouldn't hold any shares. If you go back to the privatisation, first of all I had to persuade them not to do a trade sale, which is what Finance and Treasury wanted to do. But the second thing was I wanted them not to own any shares. I said, look, don't hang around. You're actually, you're not going to be happy with what we're going to do because we're going to globalise. And so I said to them, look, by the way, the first acquisition I'm making is in the US. We're looking at a cell culture business, which is a different business, but we used to be in it. I said, we want to buy a business over there. It's $20 million. Now, do you want to be involved in the risk and liability of a US business? Well, that was absolutely a home run for me in the sense that they ran from ever owning a share in the company. But we had to do it. We had to globalise. We had no choice. And the US, you cannot be successful in our industry if you cannot succeed in the US.
I'm going to bring you.
So that was 94.
I'm going to bring you back to the present. And is it true that, first of all, when you go in the past, we were a very efficient place to do research. It was often cheaper to do research here than it was in America. Has that now been reversed? Is it cheaper to do research offshore than it is here?
Yes. There's no doubt that if you talk about the US, yes. The US is there are some pockets that are still very expensive. I'd say Southern California and probably Boston is still very expensive. But certainly I think it's true that most of the workforce is less expensive in the US than our Australian, German or Swiss researchers, because we do in all places. But that doesn't mean we're not happy there. We are very happy with the work we're doing.
Does that mean that down the track, your successor will be looking at whether he should do as much research here or whether he should do it in the States where it's so much cheaper?
Well, first of all, it's not so much cheaper, but I think dollar for dollar it is a little cheaper. But research is about quality. It's not about a numbers game. It's all about where do you access great science. So we have significant relationships here in Australia with many fine medical institutes and science. So we have a natural ability to do that. Where can I recruit the best scientists I can, the best doctors? In Australia, we are well known and we can recruit very well. If I'm just another American company trying to compete against Merck and Glaxo and Genentech, I'm going to be in a pack that no one's ever heard of me. So I get high quality staff here. And the same in Switzerland and Germany. Around Frankfurt, at Marburg, and around Bern. Bern Institutes are very fine universities in Bern as well. So it's about the quality of the people that you're getting and their natural affinity to you as an organisation. That's what you want to create. It's not about deciding it's cheaper to set up in, Wahoo taxes or something. That's not what you want to do.
America's is also a strong place. It's a change in the game.
Well, I could think that what it means is there's no doubt we'll do more clinical research in the US because that's where you've got the scale, you've got the FDA, etc. But I don't think in of itself, Rob, it is changing the game, no.
Can you talk a little bit about the payback on R&D? I mean, you spend $350, $400 million a year on R&D, half of it here. What kind of benefit do you generate? Because I think that gets the cost issue, the cost relative to
sure.
the end
the outcome, sure. Well, we've done extremely well in royalty income over a long period of time. We've probably generated almost $1 billion of just pure royalty income on some of the science we've licensed. But if you look at our products in the marketplace today, nearly all the products that are generating our growth are projects that we've invested in, either improving existing products, new clinical indications, new geographies, or in fact novel products. And I'd say at least 60, maybe even 70% of our portfolio are products that we've developed in the last 5 to 6 years. So our growth is on the back of our success in R&D and innovation.
And how much of that is due to the fact that you're working in plasma as opposed to synthetic proteins and drugs?
We like the space we're in, and we think that the successful companies in our industry are those that have mainly specialised, whether it be plasma, whether it be in insulin, whether it be in other areas. So vaccines is an example, the vaccine companies have done well. So I think it's consistent, Alan, with the view that specialisation and focus makes you make better choices. And so yes, I think we make really good choices because we have some extraordinary people in R&D, and we have John Shine as our chairman, that we make informed scientific judgments on the portfolio we do, and that's why we get a high quality return.
But can a company like CSL specialise in two things, for example? I mean, rather than become... I know. That,
well, I think
because at some point
sure.
you might say that, I know you're growing reasonably well, you've got a lot of growth going on in what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Is there a point at a point where you need to diversify and develop another specialty?
I think there's no doubt that you do look for areas that are allied to the areas in which you operate. So in In haemophilia, we're moving from plasma products to recombinant. In areas of immunology, we're looking at some antibodies that would complement immunoglobulins. So you're always looking at areas that are really closely aligned, that you understand the therapeutic area, you know the mechanism of action. So I think we have years, if not decades, of an ability to try and laterally grow. We don't need to jump into a new area where it's fraught with, difficulty.
Brian, you said in your report that you see the next phase as exciting.
Sure.
What events are taking place in the next 2 or 3 years that you think will be exciting?
Look, I think that the combination of, we've got a number of specialty products that we have in clinical trial at the moment, and we really believe that they are both great for patients. Some of the areas we're working in to try and reduce, save patients from blood loss as an example, in areas of easier treatment of patients in haemophilia and other diseases. So we have this breadth of pipeline that I think gives us confidence. Of course, we need successful clinical trials. We need stuff to work. But at the end of the day, I've never been more confident that we have the breadth of portfolio and a lot of embedded optionality inside that portfolio. That means that you can't ask me which of my 4 or 5 children I think is going to be the one that succeeds, but I am confident that some of them will succeed.
Brian, apart from the tenure, the longevity, 23 years, the thing that's remarkable about CSL since you brought it into the public limelight has been the TSR. It's over 25%, the best of any, I think, long-serving CEO. Is it something about you? Is it something about the strategy? Is it something about the business that's generated those kinds of very consistent returns to shareholders?
Look, it obviously isn't just me. I mean, I think I had a wonderful asset in the skill base of CSL I started with, even though it wasn't, highly valued at the time. I think we had a deep understanding of the value drivers and the economics of the sector far better than many others whose business was embedded either in a not-for-profit, like ZLB was owned by the Swiss Red Cross, or Aventis Behring that was owned by a very large pharma company called Aventis. So we understood the value drivers and how to create value in those businesses as global specialists. And I think that's the key that we've been able to turn. Plus, I think that in our team, we understand the M&A process very well. We try to buy well when we buy assets because, of course, one of the big parts of TSR is making sure your purchase price is as low as possible. So we obviously bought assets at a time when they were probably not fully valued.
I think one of the academic research says that the longevity of the tenure of the CEO actually is a driver of TSR. Do you think that being there 23 years has actually been a value adder for the business, that length of tenure and the right person produces good results?
I think that the consistency of purpose and the clarity of direction is very valuable, and also the relationships you have with your colleagues that you work with means that you make better judgments. And I think that's where longevity can be very valuable, that you really understand each other well, you understand when you're looking at something what to do, and how you're going to add value. So it is that consistency of purpose that I think is difficult to achieve if you're moving CEOs around rapidly.
Can I just put a bit of a damper on that for a second?
You may.
Because there is one of the great things you did was, and your company did, was to generate a vast amount of cash. Mm-hmm. And you very effectively used that cash to buy back shares and things of that sort. Are you aware that the game is now changing? And that as our population gets older, they're much less interested in buybacks and much more interested in higher distribution. And you're proposing to go against that trend, and I'm not criticising the past, but in the future, you've missed the trend.
Well, I think that we've got the balance right. I mean, when we look at our global shareholder base, we have loyal Australian retail investors, which have been wonderful for us. We have domestic institutions, and we have a larger institutional base offshore. The most tax-efficient way for us to provide funds back to shareholders is through share buybacks.
For them?
Well, and it's not that it's not that different for the Australian domestic institution as well, because we don't generate any franking credits. So you're really left with the question is, are we a retail stock for where dividends are important? I would have thought, if I was an Australian retail investor, yes, I like my dividends, but actually I'm quite happy that the share price also seems to go up periodically. And I would have thought they would have made more money with our share price going up than they would merely by focusing on dividends.
We are seeing a very big change in what investment companies and institutions want, because Australians are getting older and they do want income.
Well, look, I hear that, and I think we may take that on board. But I'd say that
Ask Marius Kloppers.
I would say BHP have a different issue. BHP have the issue of they're like a pharmaceutical company that has a drug that's a patented drug where they're getting extraordinary cash at the moment, but they're very fearful that the patent is going to finish, or in a mining sector issue that this windfall gain will stop. What shareholders are saying in that circumstance, I would assume, is that it's unclear whether they're getting the fair share of this windfall gain, and because no one's sure how long it'll last. That's a very different issue than what I describe as a growth company that's investing in its future, is trying to balance all our shareholders' needs at one time. We will retain the cash if we see opportunities to invest internally. So we like the optionality of that. So no, I think, Rob, unfortunately, I would disagree with you. I think we got the balance right.
On that note, we might leave it there. Thanks very much, Brian.
Thank you,
very
Brian.
much.